3, Part 2. "I've just had a really wonderful idea," said Diggory. "What are all the other pools?" "How do you mean?" "Why, if we can get back to our own world by jumping into this pool, mightn't we get somewhere else by jumping into one of the others, supposing there is a world at the bottom of every pool?" "But I thought we were already in your Uncle Andrew's other world, or other place, or whatever he called it. Didn't you say—" "Oh, bother Uncle Andrew," interrupted Diggory. "I don't believe he knows anything about it. He never had the pluck to come here himself. He only talked of one other world. But suppose there were dozens." "You mean this wood might be only one of them?" "No, I don't believe this wood is a world at all. I think it's just a sort of in-between place." Polly looked puzzled. "Don't you see?" said Diggory. "No, do listen. Think of our tunnel under the slates at home. It isn't a room in any of the houses. In a way, it isn't really part of any of the houses. But once you're in the tunnel, you can go along it and come out into any of the houses in the row. Mightn't this wood be the same? A place that isn't in any of the worlds, but once you've found that place, you can get into them all?" "Well, even if you can—" began Polly, but Diggory went on as if he hadn't heard her. "And of course that explains everything," he said. "That's why it's so quiet and sleepy here. Nothing ever happens here, like at home. It's in the houses that people talk and do things and have meals. Nothing goes on in the in-between places, behind the walls and above the ceilings and under the floor, or in our own tunnel. But when you come out of our tunnel, you may find yourself in any house. I think we can get out of this place into jolly well anywhere. We don't need to jump back into the same pool we came by, or not just yet." "The wood between the worlds," said Polly dreamily. "It sounds rather nice." "Come on," said Diggory. "Which pool shall we try?" "Look here," said Polly. "I'm not going to try any new pool till we've made sure that we can get back by the old one. We're not even sure if it'll work." "Yes," said Diggory, "and get caught by Uncle Andrew and have our rings taken away before we've had any fun? No thanks." "Couldn't we just go part of the way down into our pool?" said Polly, "just to see if it works. Then, if it does, we'll change rings and come up again before we're really back in Mr. Ketterly's study." "Can we go part of the way down?" "Well, it took time coming up. I suppose it'll take a little time going back." Diggory made rather a fuss about agreeing to this, but he had to in the end, because Polly absolutely refused to do any exploring in the new worlds until she had made sure about getting back to the old one. She was quite as brave as he about some dangers, wasps, for instance, but she was not so interested in finding out things nobody had ever heard of before. For Diggory was the sort of person who wants to know everything, and when he grew up he became the famous Professor Kirk, who comes into other books. After a good deal of arguing, they agreed to put on their green rings, green for safety, and said Diggory, so you can't help remembering which is which, and hold hands and jump. But as soon as they seemed to be getting back to Uncle Andrew's study, or even to their own world, Polly was to shout, "Change!" and they would slip off their greens and put on their yellows. Diggory wanted to be the one who shouted "Change," but Polly wouldn't agree. They put on the green rings, took hands, and once more shouted, "1, 2, 3, go!" This time, it worked. It was very hard to tell you what it felt like, for everything happened so quickly. At first, there were bright lights moving about in a black sky. Diggory always thinks these were stars, and even swears that he saw Jupiter quite close enough to see its moon. But almost at once there were rows and rows of roofs and chimney pots about them, and they could see St. Paul's, and knew they were looking at London. But you could see through the walls of all the houses. Then they could see Uncle Andrew, very vague and shadowy, but getting clearer and more solid-looking all the time, just as if he were coming into focus. But before he became quite real, Polly shouted, "Change!" and they did change, and our world faded away like a dream, and the green light above grew stronger and stronger, till their heads came out of the pool and they scrambled ashore. And there was the wood all about them, as green and bright and still as ever. The whole thing had taken less than a minute. "There," said Diggory, "that's all right. Now for the adventure. Any pool will do. Come on, let's try that one." "Stop," said Polly. "Aren't we going to mark this pool?" They stared at each other and turned quite white as they realized the dreadful thing that Diggory had just been going to do. For there were any number of pools in the wood, and the pools were all alike, and the trees were all alike, so that if they had once left behind the pool that led them to our own world without making some sort of landmark, the chances would have been 100 to 1 against their ever finding it again. Diggory's hand was shaking as he opened his penknife and cut out a long strip of turf on the bank of the pool. The soil, which smelled nice, was of a rich, reddish brown and showed up well against the green. "It's a good thing one of us has some sense," said Polly. "Well, don't keep on gassing about it," said Diggory. "Come along, I want to see what's in one of the other pools." And Polly gave him a pretty sharp answer, and he said something even nastier in reply. The quarrel lasted for several minutes, but it would be dull to write it all down. Let us skip on to the moment at which they stood with beating hearts and rather scared faces on the edge of the unknown pool with their yellow rings on, and held hands and once more said, "1, 2, 3, go!" Splash! Once again. It hadn't worked. This pool, too, appeared to be only a puddle. Instead of reaching a new world, they only got their feet wet and splashed their legs for a second time that morning. If it was morning, it seems to always be the same time in the wood between the worlds. "Blast and botheration!" exclaimed Diggory. "What's gone wrong now? We've put our yellow rings on all right. He said yellow for the outward journey." Now the truth was that Uncle Andrew, who knew nothing about the wood between the worlds, had quite the wrong idea about the rings. The yellow ones weren't outward rings, and the green ones were not homeward rings, at least not in the way he thought. The stuff of which both were made had all come from the wood. The stuff in the yellow rings had the power of drawing you into the wood. It was stuff that wanted to get back to its own place, the in-between place. But the stuff in the green rings is stuff that is trying to get out of its own place, so that a green ring would take you out of the wood into a world. Uncle Andrew, you see, was working with things he did not really understand. Most magicians are. Of course, Diggory did not realize the truth quite clearly either, or not until later. But when they had talked it over, they decided to try their green rings on the new pool, just to see what happened. "I'm game if you are," said Polly. But she really said this because, in her heart of hearts, she now felt sure that neither kind of ring was going to work at all in the new pool, and so there was nothing worse to be afraid of than another splash. I am not quite sure that Diggory had not the same feeling. At any rate, when they had both put on their greens and come back to the edge of the water and taken hands again, they were certainly a good deal more cheerful and less solemn than they had been the first time. 1, 2, 3, go, said Diggory, and they jumped. End of chapter 3.